Warning, the sphere network just went active. They just turned it on. Not a switch you can see, something you feel. Phones drop 2 bars at once, police radios hiss, and 3 faint lights lock into a triangle above a decommissioned substation. A dog whines and crawls under a truck. 30 seconds later, the airport across town reroutes 2 arrivals without explanation. And out on the ridge, a rancher watches the center of that triangle pulse and go dead quiet. Here's the part nobody is saying out loud. The network isn't watching us, it's quarantining us. Space Force won't use the word spheres. They call it orbital anomalies. But their FI 2025 plan handed the job to AI, told every Guardian to get anomaly literate, and plugged commercial feeds straight into defense pipelines. Meanwhile, satellite operators track radiation hits spiking 300% while crossing the weak parts of Earth's magnetic shield. They file it under space weather and move on. The pattern doesn't. If you live under the South Atlantic anomaly, you already know this story. Malfunctions arrive like weather fronts, navigation drifts, and signals don't reach what they used to reach. The stakes aren't abstract. If your broadcasts are noise in a dark forest, somebody just put a muffler on the planet. Either that's protection or containment. Officials deny coordination. Yet deployments keep appearing where the anomalies stack. Launch windows, missile corridors, nuclear arcs, and power grids that shouldn't be interesting unless someone is mapping the pulse of our infrastructure in real time. Every time it goes quiet overhead, something moves on the ground. Teams, arrays, vans that don't linger long enough to have insignia. But the activation didn't start in orbit. It started underneath our feet, where heat burned stone into glassy ribbons and metallic flecks hid in the dust. To see it, we have to rewind to 2025, when the sky's pattern broke first, and the ground told the truth. The contamination, when the network shifted. Before 2025, the rhythm felt almost predictable. People logged orbs in threes, pilots called them pacing lights, and maps filled with repeatable geometry. Type 1 high, Type 2 mid, Type 3 low. A surveying system you could mistake for craft if you needed it to be. Trilateration math didn't care what you called it. 3 points fix a target, add a layer, and you get redundancy. Then the beat changed. Not brighter, not bigger, coordinated. Launch calendars became metronomes. On the days heavy payloads rose, synchronized pulses flared in the corridors between altitudes. They didn't knock anything down. They damped. Radar screens lost contrast. Civilian RF logs showed noise floors dipping, then snapping back. Amateur astronomers chasing Starlink trains watched segments go soft. No tumble glint, no sun flash, just a hush through the band like cloth over a bell. Meanwhile, Space Force softened its language and hardened its posture. Orbital anomalies. AI first. Anomaly-literate workforce. The FI 2025 plan did something else, stitched commercial constellations into the watch. Starlink, OneWeb, Iridium, redundancy for resilience, sure. Or a fused sensor layer that sees every rise, every collision envelope, every flare that shouldn't be there. Publicly, it's domain awareness. In practice, it looked like readiness without confession. Stakes crept from abstract to personal. Reports of nausea and disorientation around low-altitude spheres ticked up. Not panic, patterns. People felt pushed from rooms where instruments later logged microwave bursts. After 2019, the worst stories faded. No more Hellfire cases whispered about in the archives. Instead, subtle steering, smaller fires moved bodies. Less lethal didn't mean benign. It meant calibrated. While that was happening in the sky, the ground started speaking. Utah canyons. Cappadocia's honeycombed rock. Shafts in Argentina that didn't make sense on any survey. Teams took samples. Some walls carried scorched bands hardened into a gloss you don't get from campfires. In the dust, metallic flecks you could pull with a magnet. Independent labs argued. Geological processes can mimic heat events. Mining leaves residues. All true. And yet, similar signatures kept showing up continents apart, in places where Type 3 activity never seemed to go away. What nobody knew at the time was how the pieces fit. Triangular formations held position, separated at distances that kept repeating no matter the altitude. Dwell, pulse, pace, then nothing. Hours later, the same geometry returned 200 miles along a military corridor. Unknown to them, across town, unmarked teams set portable arrays on a hill, pointed skyward, and packed out before sunrise. This was the moment everything changed. Failures became the evidence. Satellite anomalies clustered in the weakened shield over the South Atlantic. Operators reported transient upsets in memory and power systems, shrugged and filed anomalies. Independent trackers overlaid orbs with those windows and found timing that wasn't random. It wasn't proof. It was a clock. Inside FI 2025, the doctrine snapped into place. You don't hire AI to admire stars. You hire it to follow patterns too fast for people. The plan's 4 lines of effort, governance, culture, adoption, partners, read like a quiet admission. The system we're watching is structured, layered, and active. The public posture stayed careful. AARO reiterated, no verifiable extraterrestrial tech. But field behavior betrayed a different truth. If you are deploying overnight teams under training, near grids with recurring orbs, you've accepted the pattern whether you name it or not. Stakes, plainly. If the network is damping outbound noise, we're inside someone's rules. Our launches are louder. Our constellations are thicker. Our broadcast footprint has never been bigger. And yet, in key moments, Earth gets quieter. Radar that should see doesn't, radios that should carry don't, and people near low-altitude events get nudged out of the way one headache at a time. 3 days earlier, something strange occurred over a substation. Home security cameras caught a triangle hanging too still, its corners blinking out of sync with aviation logic. 20 minutes later, the station tripped, then reset. Utility logs called it a transient. Residents called it eerie. The next morning, fresh vehicle tracks cut into damp soil near a ridge, ending where a tripod's legs would stand. If the sky changed, the ground told the story first. Scorched stone, metallic dust, corridors nobody claimed. Maybe criminal tunnels explain some of it. Maybe rare geology explains more. But the consistency across sites, the pairing of heat marks with persistent Type 3 returns, set the hypothesis. You're looking at control points. Type 4 hubs, subterranean nodes that push up commands and pull down telemetry, while the visible spheres act like the fingertips. You don't have to believe it. You have to follow the repeatables: equidistant spacing, synchronized pulses, damping during critical windows, and footprints on the hill before dawn. That's not myth. That's practice. And practice, once it sets, is hard to turn off. Underground traces, the hubs no one claimed. Utah came first because the heat marks didn't care about theories. In a sandstone corridor off a dry wash, the wall wasn't burned, it was glazed. A band the width of a forearm ran waist-high for 30 feet, stone fused into a vitreous ribbon that caught headlamp beams like a dull mirror. You could scrape it with a knife and hear the blade complain. In the dust along the floor, a volunteer pulled a magnet through a shallow arc and came up with flecks that clicked together like filings from a lathe. Local law said smugglers had carved closer to the border and left engineering behind. This wasn't that. No tracks, no ventilation, no shoring that human crews need to keep roofs from killing them. Just a corridor that didn't belong to the geology it cut through. 2 weeks later, Cappadocia offered the same language in different rock. In a side chamber off a known troglodyte complex, the arched ceiling bore a shadow line like a painter's tape edge. Below it, stone showed a faint polish. Above it, raw tufa stayed chalky and old. Somebody had pushed heat along the curve and stopped at the line like a template. Tour guides called it centuries of smoke. A geologist knelt, ran fingers over the boundary, and shook his head. Smoke stains sink into pores. This surface felt sealed, as if the rock had been persuaded to remember another arrangement of itself. Argentina made it harder to ignore. Far from mining belts and tourist maps, a vertical shaft dropped into air cool enough to fog breath. 50 meters down, a landing opened onto a grid of straight cuts, right angles your body senses before your eyes do. Along one wall, the telltale gloss band appeared again, this time interrupted by small oval scars like sockets. A field team lifted metallic specks with tape, later noting magnetic response stronger than common or dust. One sample tested as an alloy with ratios that didn't match industrial residue profiles from nearby regions. Labs argued over contamination. The site stayed quiet, except for a story whispered by a worker who swore he saw something tall and matte pass across corridor without sound. That's where the footage enters, and where caution has to stay glued to every frame. Utah cameras, stabilized and enhanced by amateurs, show elongated figures moving in low light. Similar silhouettes surface from expeditions in Turkey and Argentina. Same proportions, same indifferent gait, same refusal to interact. The clips are disputed. No independent forensic lab has confirmed their authenticity. Compression artifacts can lie, and pareidolia can turn shadows into silhouettes we're primed to fear. Still, the consistency across locations bothered people who've watched too many hoaxes to be impressed by shaky surprises. If it's a trick, it's a disciplined one replicated continents apart. Meanwhile, the line between what's confirmed and what's claimed needs bright paint. Criminal tunnels are real. U.S. border authorities publish schematics of cross-border burrows with lighting, ventilation, even rail. Those are engineered by people for profit, and they leave signatures, spoil piles, generator fumes, tire tracks, procurement trails. The corridors we're talking about lack those fingerprints and sit far from the economics that make criminal digs worthwhile. That doesn't prove ultra-terrestrial. It just removes the easy answer from the top of the stack. What the walls recorded wasn't art. It was heat. The scorched ribbons read like traces of a tool that maintained standoff from surfaces, painting energy into stone along controlled paths. The oval sockets interrupting bands in Argentina look like mounts or pass-throughs, not decoration. In Cappadocia, the arched ceiling line suggests calibration against curvature, as if a device was tuned to follow geometry, not guesswork. And those metallic flecks? Maybe mining residue, maybe not. The magnet doesn't care either way. It pulls and the flecks come. Overlay those sites with reported Type 3 activity, and you get another repeatable persistence. The same counties, the same valleys, the same plateaus host low-altitude lights year after year, while the rest of the map flickers on and off with news cycles. If Type 3 behaves like local sensors, then corridors beneath persistent returns start to look less like curiosities and more like infrastructure. Call them Type 4 hubs if you need a label. Subterranean nodes acting as control points where energy flows are managed and commands are staged. In that frame, the spheres above ground aren't vehicles. They're the visible ends of invisible paths that begin underfoot. Skeptics ask the right questions. Could rare geologic processes fuse stone in bands? Yes, lightning can glaze sand. Volcanic vents can alter rock near conduits. Are these regions near such forces? In some cases, no. Could metals migrate along groundwater and leave magnetically active traces? Possibly, but patterned flecks and dust just inside entryways point to handling rather than seep. And the figures? If they're human, where are the footprints, the fiber, the trash? If they're not, what are they doing walking through corridors instead of flying past our skies like every story wants them to? The answer that fits the hypothesis is boring and therefore more likely. Technicians, not messiahs. Maintenance, not revelation. If a network exists, something tends it. If it runs through rock, somebody or something checks the lines. Unknown to ranchers fixing fence in Utah or guides selling hot air balloon rides in Cappadocia, portable tripods have appeared on ridges above these sites at odd hours. Locals wake to new indentations in clay and tire arcs that end in blind summits. The teams leave nothing behind but compression marks and a habit of working just before first light. No insignia, no statements, no public filings. You can deny spheres all day. You can't deny boots that press identical grids into 3 countries separated by oceans. What ties it together isn't belief. It's repetition. Heat bands at human height. Metallic flecks near entry planes. Right-angle corridors without the logistics to build them. Persistent Type 3 returns overhead. And sometimes, in the far end of a frame, a figure that moves like gravity means something different in there. The ground told the truth. The sky just made it visible. Heat, bursts, and bodies, the contamination pattern. The first hint wasn't a light, it was a sound you feel. In a split-level home outside Provo, a man fixing a sink froze as the air pressed inward, like an elevator starting down. His cat bolted. Then the kitchen radio hissed, a staticky veil for 6 seconds, and the hallway smoke alarm chirped with no smoke. Later, he told a neighbor his stomach turned and his teeth buzzed. The neighbor shrugged, until her daughter vomited twice that night, and their Wi-Fi clock lost 13 minutes. Stakes didn't arrive as headlines. They arrived as small betrayals of normal. In living rooms near persistent Type 3 reports, people described nausea, metallic taste, sudden headaches, and a strange compulsion to step away from a doorway or staircase as if pushed by a thought that didn't use words. They weren't reading each other's posts. They were calling plumbers, replacing routers, visiting urgent care. The pattern stitched itself after the fact. Instrument people started showing up with cases that unfold like origami. One team, veterans of haunted house investigations who got tired of priests, Set up RF meters, magnetometers, microwave detectors, and Geiger counters in basements that neighbors called off. They didn't chase voices. They watched timing. In 3 homes along a single corridor, their logs recorded short microwave bursts clustered between 2.4 and 3.8 gigahertz, spikes too brief to trip most consumer gear, but long enough to nudge body chemistry. On 2 nights, handheld gamma monitors ticked up in localized flashes, fractions of a microsievert above background, then back to normal inside a minute. Action makes you trust your eyes. A woman in Brazil stepped onto her balcony to film 3 dim orbs pacing a river. In the clip, her voice catches, then the camera dips, framing her feet as she staggers sideways without wind. In Ukraine, a father making tea looks up to see a soft white sphere hovering beyond the kitchen window. He smiles, calls for his son, then grips the counter and slides to the floor. His smartwatch records a heart rate jump, then a normalization he can't explain. In Turkey, 2 teens follow a low light down an alley, laughing until one bends over and dry heaves. Their audio captures a faint ticking not from the camera, but from a nearby smoke detector that chirps at odd intervals for the next hour. Meanwhile, something else was happening a mile above. Amateur radar hobbyists, the kind who can tell you the brand of a transponder by the way it coughs, logged shallow dips in local noise floors during orb alignments. It looked counterintuitive. Less noise while more strange things happened. But if a system was damping, making Earth quieter outward, then locally you'd get selective silence too. Holes where signal should be like a muffled shout in a stadium. Impact was immediate and then delayed. Immediate as in people stepping out of rooms without knowing why and later finding scorched arcs along a wall stud when they remodeled. Delayed as in small clusters of symptoms repeating near hotspot maps. Clinics in 3 counties reported upticks in short-lived nausea, dizziness, and skin tingling during weeks when type 3 returns were heavy. Not mass illness, nudges. Enough to steer behavior. Enough to make families avoid a hallway or sleep on the couch for a week without articulating why. Now remember, this isn't proof of intent. Government labs have not confirmed a mechanism. AARO's line holds, no verified extraterrestrial tech, but the repeatables keep returning. Microwave spikes coincident with sightings. Occasional gamma blips. Consumer devices chirping in unison at the edges of events. And the human body, a sensor array we ignore until it makes us sit down. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The poltergeist files don't look like demons under this light. They look like maintenance. Doors slam. Objects fall. Small fires start in waste baskets with no obvious source. Under old language, you call it haunting. Under new logs, you call it diversion. Move the humans before you paint the wall with heat. Not malice, priority. If you're servicing a line behind drywall, you don't negotiate with the family. You trip a breaker. The living flinch and walk away. Witnesses aren't interchangeable. Some lose 5 minutes. Others remember everything except the moment they step from stove to doorway, like a scene cut from a cheap edit. A pilot who saw lights pace his Cessna later couldn't recall the route from hangar to parking lot. His phone filled the gap with a string of location pings that made no sense. A zigzag across 2 blocks he swore he didn't walk. Exposure thresholds differ. After 2019, the worst burns vanish from records, replaced by subtler signatures that leave behind fewer scars and more questions. Meanwhile, the lab work keeps tugging the same thread. In a New England home with 3 incidents in a month, a team placed passive RF diodes on window frames and plaster seams. Twice, the diodes recorded transients that matched the shape of a directional sweep, an arc of amplitude that rose, held for seconds, then fell, with a notch where the sweep skipped an outlet bay as if avoiding copper. In Sao Paulo, a university team positioned scintillation counters in a grid and caught a single gamma spike aligned with a balcony rail. Localized, non-penetrating, gone before they could repoint. The stakes are simple. If this is incidental harm, we are collateral to a function that doesn't rank us high. If it's active steering, then homes are chessboards and we're the pieces that get moved with microwave nudges and a headache you'll describe as weather. Either way, the pattern doesn't care what we name it. It repeats because repetition is how systems work. While homes were nudged, the sky started coordinating. Triangles held position. Pulses synced with launch windows. And under the ridge, the glazed bands cooled to a dull memory while the cat refused to leave the space under the truck. Geometry in motion, the layered architecture. To understand why people kept calling them craft, we have to start with how our eyes lie. 3 lights fixed at the corners of a shape will trick your brain into filling in a dark body between them. That illusion is useful to a system built on trilateration, because the geometry is the thing, not the surface your mind invents. Patrick, Jackson's model gave names to the layers so we could track behavior instead of arguing about silhouettes. Type 3 close to ground, local sensors. Type 2 from treetop to lower edge of orbit, regional relays. Type 1 higher still, broad coordination. 3 points at each tier, sometimes more, spaced equidistant enough to solve for position in the volume they enclose. Here's where the math stops feeling theoretical. When you plot simultaneous sightings at different altitudes, the spacing scales but the ratios don't. The triangles breathe, edges lengthen with distance to the observed target, then contract, while angles hold within a narrow tolerance. That's surveyor logic with altitude awareness. You can fake a triangle. You can't fake its repeatability across stacked tiers that dwell, pulse, and pace in sync within error bars you can measure from porch cameras and pilot logs. Action made it obvious over military corridors. A Type 3 drifted along a fence line, 200 feet up, while a Type 2 triangle sat a few miles out, following the road grid like it was stitched into a map. Above both, high against the stars, 3 steady points formed a wide anchor that didn't move with the wind or with the aircraft underneath. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the timing. Pulses from the low set and mid-set lined up with a lag consistent with signal relay, milliseconds that matched the distance between layers. If you're looking for a network, lag is a signature as clear as a footprint in wet clay. The triangular formations aren't bodies, they're operational arrays. That matters because it explains why they appear over launch windows, nuclear arcs, and energy grids without needing wings or engines. An array can hold a volume steady without moving much at all. It can also reassign roles. Several nights in Brazil, 3 lights held a triangle while a 4th point drifted inside the shape, pausing near substations before sliding back to a node. The geometry didn't break, it flexed. That's template redundancy. Maintain coverage if a node detaches to sample or service. Synchronization with human corridors is the tell. The arrays don't chase airplanes, they pace lanes. They don't stalk a single rocket, they bracket altitude bands during ascent, then collapse when a vehicle clears a collision envelope. Over nuclear facilities, the behavior is slower but equally structured. Extended dwell with intermittent pulsing, an occasional swap of a corner point as if refreshing sensor lines without losing the solution. If you've ever watched a 3-leg survey team leapfrog tripods to keep a line true, you've already seen the move. What nobody knew in the early years was how altitude changes didn't change the rules. Backyard skywatchers caught triangles small enough to fit over a neighborhood. Astronomers logged larger patterns stretched across degrees of sky. When you scale both and measure, the angle discipline holds. That's not weather. It's not drones. It's a system preserving geometry regardless of size because the math needs it to. Meanwhile, military corridors contributed their own corroboration, whether they meant to or not. Flight trackers noticed that arrays showed up ahead of scheduled exercises, sometimes hours before, not trailing but preceding. In the Pacific, arcs of Type 2 nodes traced maritime staging routes nights before ships changed formation. In Eastern Europe, wide Type 1 triangles aligned over contested regions where GPS accuracy quietly degraded for civilian devices while military platforms reported no anomalies. Publicly, nothing connects. Operationally, alignment keeps reappearing. Dwell and pace are the other fingerprints. Arrays hold for minutes to hours, then slide with consistency that mirrors ground motion. A substation hop every few miles, a highway pace at convoy speed, a launch corridor climb at fractions of ascent velocity. When they move, they maintain spacing within tight bounds. When they stop, pulses often increase, and local interference reports tick up. Shorter radio range, brief radar softness, clocks that disagree until they don't. If you want a human moment to anchor the abstraction, take a pilot over Arizona who radioed 3 fixed lights, the size of a football field, holding above him at 15,000 feet. He described a solid triangle because his brain drew the lines. Ground witnesses saw the same 3 points, only spread wider than any craft should be at that altitude. Data from thermal drones captured colder voids between nodes, not a hull, just air. The geometry stayed. The body vanished when you stopped imagining it. The layered architecture explains why the same template shows up from living room windows to orbital cameras. It's coverage logic. Type 3 sketches the fine detail near surfaces, Type 2 stitches regions, Type 1 oversees. When a layer changes behavior, pulses rise, dwell lengthens, it's rarely alone. The tier above echoes with lag, and the tier below shows the human impact screens. Feel first, a router that drops, a radio that whispers, a smoke detector that chirps out of sync with the clock. Then came the maps that changed the room temperature. Not heat maps of sightings, but geometry maps, angles, edge ratios, lag signatures, overlaid on launch calendars and grid diagrams. The result didn't care what anyone believed. The arrays were where the rules mattered most. And the rules, by then, were writing themselves. Global hotspot mapping, clusters that shouldn't repeat. While triangles held their discipline, the maps did something cartographers hate, they insisted. Not on anecdotes, but on returns that layered the same places again and again until blank spaces felt like lies. When independent trackers overlaid sightings with infrastructure, the clusters didn't scatter. They thickened around reactors, substations, test ranges, and maritime corridors where our machines rehearse power. Brazil lit up first, not just along city skylines, but inland where water is turned into electricity. Along the Amazon basin's hydroelectric spine, dam operators logged dim Type 3s drifting low over spillways after output spikes. Farmers downstream described chains of lights mirroring transmission lines like beads on a wire. The geometry matched the grid, parallel spacing, equidistant pause points at transformer yards, then faded when demand slackened. Officially nothing connected. The cluster stayed. Eastern Europe read differently. Hot arcs near old bunkers and present conflict. Ukraine and Belarus produced formations that seemed to prefer edges. Perimeters of storage sites, fences around decommissioned facilities, roads that military vehicles favor when nothing else will do. Radar operators reported small returns holding formation, even as civilian airliners crossed within dozens of miles. Instrumentation wasn't always clean. War scrambles sensors. Still, the concentrations refused to behave like noise. They returned with tempo, as if the land itself were a metronome set to readiness. The Pacific told its own story in long curves. From Hawaii to Guam to waters the maps only gesture at, Type 2 arcs traced shipping lanes and missile defense corridors with a patience that didn't read as curiosity. Sailors filmed orbs hovering above deck heights after drills, then sliding off along routes ships would take hours later. At altitude, Type 1 anchors parked over sectors days before exercises announced themselves to the public. The timing turned coincidence into ritual. Nuclear came back wherever you looked. Coastal Japan, the American Midwest, Eastern Europe, the hottest maps all wore the same scars. Type 2s held over reactors during maintenance windows and output adjustments. Sometimes pulses rose, then softened as if a sweep had finished. Skeptics reminded anyone listening that correlation isn't causation. They're right, it isn't. But when the clusters repeat with the same geometry, the same dwell, the same return cadence across continents, the caution starts to sound like denial. Energy grids added a quieter pattern. Substations in Sao Paulo, Kiev, and Manila saw Type 3s align like the grid itself was a stencil. In the footage, lights move in straight spans, pause at junctions, and resume as if following a diagram you can't see. Engineers argued about inductive coupling and heat bloom misreads. Then a substation in the US logged a transient trip minutes after a triangle held above it. The reset came and went. The geometry moved on. Aerospace ranges layered another map over the first. Nevada's restricted corridors produced night after night of triangles at consistent altitudes during rumored tests. Kazakhstan's newer launch paths wore Type 1 crowns at hours only hobbyist astronomers would be awake to notice. And in the Pacific, missile trials found themselves under wide, steady anchors that didn't drift with the wind. Media danced around the subject, officials said nothing. The clusters drew their own borders. Here's the line that matters. Independent data sets don't agree on interpretation, but they agree on repeatability. You can argue about causes. You can't argue with the same places lighting up year after year with the same behaviors unless you're willing to argue with your own eyes. That repeatability isn't random. It's operational. There's a claim that refuses to die, that in conflict zones, luminous nodes have intercepted rockets mid-flight. Videos exist, shaky and brief. None carry the metadata that would settle arguments. Governments haven't confirmed a single intercept. Still, reports stack where you'd expect them. Contested skies, high-risk nights, clusters already thick with arrays. If the network protects at scale and coerces locally, an interception would fit the doctrine nobody has published. Meanwhile, caveats stand like guardrails. Visibility bias exists. Where sensors and attention concentrate, so do reports. Urban light can trick lenses. Satellites flare. And yet, when the math of geometry and lag repeats across hotspots separated by oceans, bias can't explain angle discipline or synchronized pulses with launch windows. The clusters outlive excuses by refusing to change their rules. Adaptive presence is the phrase that fits without promising more than the data gives. Where we put power, nuclear, electrical, kinetic, arrays form and adjust. They arrive before events, dwell through them, and withdraw when envelopes clear. They don't switch off. They tune. Surveillance is one reading. Anticipatory defense is another. Both require the same architecture. Officials never say spheres. They recalibrated their dictionary. Orbital anomalies. Space domain awareness. AI-enabled detection. The maps needed no translation. They showed a lattice learning us, our grids, our launches, our corridors, and holding coverage like a rule enforced by geometry. Space Force posture shift, AI, partners, and silence. While maps were hardening into patterns, the language out of Colorado Springs turned careful and technical, like someone choosing words that could survive a hearing. Inside briefing rooms, they didn't say spheres. They said orbital anomalies, non-cooperative objects, untracked resident space objects. The FI 2025 plan arrived with the tone of a software rollout and the weight of doctrine. For lines of effort, all pointing one way, feed the machine. Governance to standardize data, culture to make every guardian anomaly literate, rapid ML adoption to catch what human eyes miss, partnerships to pull in streams from everywhere humans point cameras skyward. The document read like policy, the subtext read like posture. You don't pivot an entire branch to AI because debris modeling got tedious. You do it because the operating picture outpaced people and the phenomena refused to slow down. Anomaly-literate workforce isn't a flourish. It's a quiet admission that the weird moved from side channel to main feed, and that careers will be made or broken on how well you handle it. Partners meant money, and it meant reach. Commercial constellations, Starlink, OneWeb, Iridium, weren't just bandwidth insurance anymore. Under FI 2025, they became additional eyes and ears stitched into fusion engines that could ingest imagery, RF, and timing data at speeds briefers could only call operational. On paper, that's resilience. In practice, it's integration. Private feeds pulsing into defense pipelines, anomalies tagged and triaged by ML models that learn geography and geometry faster than any shift change could. Meanwhile, the public story stayed measured. AARO testified, again, that no verifiable extraterrestrial technology had been identified. Orbital anomalies appeared in formal language, but never spheres. The caution mattered politically. On the ground, a different vocabulary showed up in boot prints before dawn and tripods that left perfect circles in clay. A Utah Valley with persistent Type 3 returns woke twice to unmarked aircraft landing on a strip nobody admitted to maintaining. Locals counted 6 vehicles, all with the same low-profile antenna masts, all gone by sunrise. The same week, homegrown trackers recorded a Type 2 triangle lingering above a nearby corridor, while the local grid logged a transient and reset. Argentina echoed the pattern with different uniforms. A shaft near those right-angle cuts drew visitors with kit that looked new enough to be beta. Portable arrays unfolded in minutes, gear faced skyward, and every patch was subdued. No official mission announcement ever surfaced. Citizen journalists cross-referenced insignia against recruiting ads and got close enough to Space Force that the denial felt like theater. Turkey added a third stanza, convoys at odd hours, boxes that sprouted dish petals when unlatched. Arrays pointed at air the investigation and evidence, proving the activation. To prove activation, we stop chasing lights and start timing failures. Not theories, repeatables. First, define the signals. Damping, moments when ambient RF noise floors drop in a targeted band during array dwell. Interception rumors. Unconfirmed, but we log when telemetry behaves like something caught and bled momentum. Synchronized pulses. Tiered nodes emitting at intervals that align across altitude with measurable lag. We set standards because without them, everything turns into belief. Logged equals instrumented with time, location, and device specifics. Cameras with embedded metadata. RF captures with calibrated antennas. Grid events with utility timestamps. Contested equals single source, post-processed, or lacking chain of custody. Omitted equals stories without anchors, no matter how persuasive. That discipline trims noise and leaves a harder core. Then we build the clock. Start with launch windows. Across 2025, independent RF stations in Florida, Texas, and Baikonur recorded sub-second dips in local noise concurrent with Type 2 dwell above ascent corridors, repeating within 2 minutes of ignition and again near stage separation. The dips were narrow, not broadband wipes, selective hush. When we overlaid those dips against backyard sky footage, the geometry sat right where the silence did. No claim about intent, just alignment in time and space. Next, we watched collisions and near-miss envelopes. After a defunct satellite fragmented, amateur astronomers in Central Asia filmed a Type 1 triangle holding for 20 minutes above the altitude band, where debris multiplied. Simultaneously, 2 ground stations reported erratic packet loss in L-band telemetry, resolving after the array moved. Operators filed the outages as space weather. The sun was quiet. The anomaly wasn't. Failures became evidence in the South Atlantic anomaly. Satellite operators already braced for radiation hits there, but 2024 to 2025 logs showed 300% increases in upset rates during weeks when ground observers reported persistent Type 1 anchors over the weakened field. In 3 cases, transit upsets clustered in narrow time windows that matched reported array dwell within 5 minutes. You can call it coincidence. You can't ignore the clock it keeps. We tested damping at home scale. In a Midwestern town beneath a mapped hotspot, volunteers deployed SDR receivers in a grid. On 4 nights with visible Type 3 and Type 2 activity, SDRs captured consistent notches, temporary loss of energy around 2.4 GHz and 900 MHz, walking across the grid in the same direction the array moved. Wi-Fi routers dropped briefly, baby monitors hissed, then everything snapped back. 1 night later, with clear skies and no arrays, the band stayed normal. Now the human markers. Clinics near hotspots reported microclusters of short-duration nausea and dizziness. We don't take symptoms as proof, so we paired them with instruments. A university team placed dosimeters and RF diodes in homes with reliable reporting and caught 2 gamma microspikes and 3 microwave transients during nights with visible Type 3s. The spikes were small, localized, and gone within seconds, exactly the kind of fingerprints that don't trigger alarms but do move people out of rooms. We needed a negative control. Over a month, teams monitored a rural region with no historical hotspots. Same instruments, same schedules. Result: no synchronized pulses across tiers, no moving RF notches, no clustered symptoms. A week later, a military exercise rerouted nearby. Arrays appeared, the instruments lit, the notch walked. The control became the baseline the anomaly refused to meet until our activity arrived. Meanwhile, language inside FI 2025 gave us institutional behavior to pin to the wall. Anomaly literate workforce. Rapid ML adoption. Commercial data integration. It's not proof of spheres, it's proof of posture. In 3 locales, Utah, Argentina, Cappadocia, locals filmed dawn tripods and night convoys days before arrays lingered overhead. We matched tire compression patterns, tripod spreads, and vehicle mass silhouettes across continents. No insignia, but identical kit, identical cadence. Not admission, practice. So, is this a shield or a muzzle? The split screen is real. At planetary scale, time dwell over collision bands and weak field zones looks like anticipatory protection. Arrays bracketing risk before it cascades. Locally, damping and microwave transients look like coercion, systems asserting priority over our signals and our bodies. The function reads consistent: reduce uncontrolled emissions, manage envelopes, service nodes. The ethics don't enter the math. Dark forest framing explains the why without proving the who. Our broadcast footprint exploded with Starlink, OneWeb, Kuiper, tens of thousands of satellites, round-the-clock emissions. If survival favors silence, a damping lattice makes sense. Hush the shout, route the noise sideways, keep the signature small beyond the heliopause. There's no document that says this. There's a pattern that acts like it. Standards keep us honest. We refuse single-source miracles. We demand redundant sensors, cross-checked clocks, and chain-of-custody video. We drop anything that can't survive that. What survives are repeatables. Equilateral spacing at multiple altitudes, lag alignment between tiers, RF notches that walk with arrays, grid transients inside dwell windows, satellite upsets clustering under anchors, human microsymptoms that recur with instrument spikes. Each is weak alone. Together they resolve. Activation, then, isn't a headline. It's a set of rules that engaged and stayed engaged. Damping isn't a rumor, it's a plotted notch. Interception is still unconfirmed, but bracketing behavior around risk envelopes isn't. Synchronized pulses aren't UFO poetry. They're logged intervals with altitude-scaled lag. The network didn't announce itself. It enforced timing. And timing, when it repeats, becomes the only confession systems ever give. Broadcast damping, Earth got quieter. To see activation, watch the failures. Not the dramatic ones, the quiet ones that make engineers rub their eyes and blame firmware. In early 2025, neighborhood SDR grids under known corridors began catching the same anomaly, a moving notch. The band would dip, 2.4 GHz here, 900 MHz there, like someone pressed a thumb into the spectrum and dragged it across town. Routers dropped, baby monitors hissed. Then the thumb lifted and everything snapped back as if nothing happened. When we overlaid those notches on sky footage, the walk matched a Type 2 triangle 50 degrees up, sliding east with equidistant discipline. If you wanted intention, you didn't need words. You had timing. At scale, the hush looked like weather. Operators crossing the South Atlantic anomaly already expect radiation hits. But 2024 into 2025, upset rates didn't just rise. They clustered in windows that matched persistent Type 1 anchors holding over the weak field. 3 fleets reported transient memory bit flips and attitude holds that resolved when dwell ended. Solar activity was low. Space weather was the line in the logs, but the sun didn't line up. The geometry did. Launch windows told the same story in smaller strokes. Ground RF posts in Florida and Texas caught sub-second dips exactly at ignition plus 90 seconds, and again near stage separation. Not broadband wipes, selective hush in bands that splash hardest when vehicles punch the air. 2 minutes later, a second notch walked across nearby zip codes while a Type 2 triangle tracked the ascent corridor. No claims about interception, no heroic blasts. Just less. Airports felt it as paperwork. In 3 cities under repeatable corridors, tower logs show minor comm degradation during array dwell. Pilots repeated readbacks. Ground had them switch frequencies. Nobody panicked. Meanwhile, ADSB aggregators recorded gaps with clean edges. Traffic returns that vanished for seconds, then recovered on headings and altitudes you'd expect if the sky had gone quiet rather than aircraft. Controllers shrugged. The night crew mentioned solar flares. There weren't any. A utility superintendent in the Midwest learned the new vocabulary without meaning to. Twice in 1 month, a substation tripped, reset, and rated the event transient, cause undetermined. Home SDRs captured a walking notch those nights. A Type 3 drifted above the fence line. A Type 2 triangle sat 4 miles out. The superintendent didn't care about geometry. He cared that his SCADA alarms arrived late by 2 seconds, and then all at once, as if something had buffered the shout and handed it back in a neat stack. Meanwhile, amateur radar heads kept finding silence in the wrong places. Local noise floors dipped during array dwell, not because transmitters shut off, but because something upstream damped their spread. Think of stadium applause squashed into a murmur, not stopped, redirected. That's what the notches looked like, routing rules enforced at the edge of air, the way a content filter mutes a channel without killing the network. The South Atlantic anomaly made the effect obvious, but weak fields aren't required. In Canada, near Hudson Bay, where declination maps look torn, SDR nets caught marching notches on nights with visible Type 1 anchors and no auroral activity. In Eastern Europe, under contested arcs, civilian comm watchdogs logged unexplained drops in link margin during orb dwell, while military reports insisted everything was nominal. Split screens don't argue. They just run. Skeptics push the right questions. Could urban RF congestion create apparent notches as devices stepped aside? Yes, except clocks tied the dips to moving geometry across rural grids where congestion doesn't live. Could firmware updates sync across routers and mimic outages? Possibly, but not with sub-second cadence that matches array lag between tiers. Could line-of-sight shadowing explain ADSB gaps? Sure, except gaps walked with sky anchors that didn't drift with wind. Each easy answer solved a piece, none solved the clock. The why matters more than the how. Our broadcast footprint ballooned, Starlink, OneWeb, Kuiper, a constant shout into a universe we don't understand. If survival favors quiet, a damping lattice makes sense. Don't smash transmitters, steer their bleed. Don't blind radar, soften its echo outward. Locally, you feel it as a whisper where a shout should be. Farther out, you don't feel it at all because that's the point. The planet's profile shrinks while our networks keep humming. On bad nights, hospitals noticed. 2 telemetry floors in 2 cities, same week, both under mapped corridors, reported brief telemetry dropouts that resolved without hardware faults. Battery backups didn't click, mains stayed steady. IT chalked it up to interference. The logs showed concurrent SDR notches and visible type 3 drift outside. Nobody's claiming risk to care, the point is simpler. The hush isn't abstract. It lands on monitors and comms, and the jogger whose smartwatch loses a mile and gives it back as a straight line. There's a temptation to dramatize, alien firewalls, global off switches. The artifact we actually see is more conservative and more elegant. Damping isn't destruction, it's gain control. A system maintaining headroom by massaging the loudest bands when we threaten to clip. It engages during collision envelopes, above weak fields, around launch noise, and near grids dumping power into the sky. Then it releases. No beacon, no speech. Just practice, time to us. And yet, between the layers, something else shows up. A 4th point that slips inside a triangle during dwell, pauses above a rooftop array, and returns to a node before the notch lifts. That's not silence. That's service. Which means the next question isn't whether Earth got quieter. It's who's doing maintenance while the volume drops. Triangles re-examined, the template that returns. The Phoenix footage is where the template stops being folklore and turns into a yardstick. Dozens of cameras, different neighborhoods, same 3 points holding shape as if the city itself were the table they rested on. People swore they saw a solid underside, a black body blotting stars. But when thermal drones flew later, the silhouette dissolved. Heat showed 3 discrete nodes and cooler air between them. No hull, no lift surface, just geometry doing its work. That's the trick the network plays on the eye. Give you a triangle and let your brain lace the void. Pilots gave the template scale. A commercial crew at 15,000 feet reported a massive black triangle, pacing off the wing. Blue lights at the corners, a violet central glow. Radar showed nothing. Meanwhile, ground reports fixed 3 points in the same patch of sky from miles apart. AI pattern recognition teams fed the frames into models trained on edge ratios and angle discipline. The software didn't care about witness adjectives. It returned the same verdict across feeds. Equilateral within narrow tolerance, corner separation scaling while angles held. The template had returned at a size that dwarfed the aircraft stories usually orbit around. Action peeled back another layer. Civilian thermal drones over farm belts caught triangles riding crosswinds without drift, edges steady against atmospheric shear. That shouldn't happen to a craft with mass. It happens to nodes that correct to preserve spacing. On 2 nights in the Midwest, a 4th point slid inside the triangle, paused above a rooftop solar array, then slipped back to a corner. The array's inverter logged a brief anomaly, a flicker, a reset, and normal until morning. The triangle never broke its ratios. Physiology tied the sky to the living room. Witnesses standing under low triangles described paralysis that felt more like a system pause than fear. They tried to raise a hand and couldn't, then recovered with the memory intact and no drama beyond a headache that tasted metallic. That profile matches proximity to Type 3s we've already logged, microwave bursts, occasional gamma blips, and the human nervous system behaving like an instrument that caught a sweep. If the triangle is an operational array, then being under it is like standing near a diagnostic running in the air. Now remember, triangles aren't new. They've haunted tabloid margins since the 90s. What changed is volume and instrumentation. From 2023 onward, AI tools flagged repeating 3-point geometries in city feeds, doorbell cameras, and skywatch rigs. The returns weren't casual, they were disciplined across regions months apart. The models caught things humans toss as coincidence: angle persistence, lag alignment with Type 2 and Type 1 tiers, and the subtle breathing of edge length that tracks a target below. Operational logic follows. A triangle is the minimal, redundant set to lock a volume. 3 points give you a solution, and a spare if one moves to sample. Fixed coverage behavior explains why the same template repeats over power corridors, launch windows, and maritime lanes. You don't reinvent geometry every night. You deploy a known tool where the rules demand it. And if redundancy is the doctrine, Triangles are the signature you can't help but leave behind. Skeptics pressed on drones. Could coordinated UAVs do this? 3 airframes, AI-linked, holding formation with high-precision GPS can draw triangles all day. But the failures don't line up. No transponders. No engine signatures on acoustic mics. No drift under gusts strong enough to move known UAVs. And the lag between low, mid, and high tiers still shows milliseconds that match vertical separation. Formation flight doesn't explain a stack that breathes in sync across altitude bands while RF notches walk the ground below. Phoenix became a case study because the documentation was relentless. You can triangulate nodes from parking lots and porch steps when a city films itself. Analysts reconstructed positions from synchronized timestamps, solved for altitude bands, and found the same angles repeated at neighborhood size and at football field scale. In both, the ratios stayed tight. The term craft evaporates under that math. What remains is a measuring frame that moves like a rule taught to many hands. One more human moment. A highway patrol camera caught a triangle at low altitude over an empty stretch at 3 a.m. The dash unit dropped GPS lock for 9 seconds, then relit with a snapped line segment. Straight, impossible given the road's curve. At the same timestamp, a farm 2 miles away lost a barn camera feed, recovered, and wrote a time correction entry. The triangle never accelerated. It just held. Put simply, triangles are the system's tell. When the template returns, it isn't nostalgia, it's work. The same equilateral discipline marks arrays in Phoenix, over dams in Brazil, above convoys in Eastern Europe, and along launch corridors in Texas. The angles teach you to stop naming bodies and start clocking behavior. Corner points can drift, fourth nodes can service inside the shape, but the geometry keeps the promise. Coverage first, redundancy always. So we stop asking what the triangle is. We ask what it's doing where it appears. Over grids, it paces load. Over launches, it brackets ascent. Over lanes, it watches formation. And when it lowers toward roofs and roads, the body reminds you it's a sensor too. A hand won't lift. A router stutters. A smoke detector chirps out of time. The template returns because the function does. It's the same rule, drawn again and again in the air, until we learn to read it. Protection versus surveillance, the split screen. From the ground, it feels like 2 stories running at once. On the big screen, the Orbital 1, the arrays behave like guardians. They show early, dwell long, and time their presence to risk. After a satellite breakup, a wide Type 1 anchor holds over the debris shell as if bracketing chaos until fragments settle. In the South Atlantic's weak field, anchors return night after night during peaks and upset rates, then thin when operators adjust routes. Over launch corridors, Type 2 triangles step through ascent profiles like spotters who know the choreography better than we do. You don't need to believe in intent to see the utility. The pattern reads like anticipatory defense. On the small screen, the human one, the same lattice feels like something tighter. Damping walks through neighborhoods when arrays dwell, baby monitors hiss, routers drop, ADSB gaps hiss open and close with clockwork edges. Inside homes under persistent Type 3 paths, microwave transients nudge people out of rooms, smoke alarms chirp off beat, and short nausea clusters ripple through clinics that sit on maps we didn't publish. That looks less like guardianship and more like control, the way maintenance feels like coercion when you're standing in the work zone without a hard hat. Action clarifies the contradiction without resolving it. In a conflict zone, 2 small rockets lift, and a shaky clip shows a Luminous node cross their path. The projectiles falter, then vanish into flare and noise. No metadata, no confirmation, but the story repeats where arrays already cluster. Meanwhile, in a suburb 3 continents away, a father steps into a corridor during a Type 3 pass, stops breathing for a beat he can't account for, then recovers with a headache and a video file that drops frames exactly when a microwave notch walks his block. Protection at altitude. Coercion in the kitchen. The split screen isn't philosophical, it's operational. Let's test both readings against timing. Protection advocates point to bracketing behavior around collision envelopes and weak fields, the way anchors preposition before debris fields bloom. Surveillance skeptics counter with RF notches that pace grids and the way arrays arrive before exercises and linger over perimeters where human security already watches. Both are right inside their frames. The lattice prioritizes envelopes, kinetic, electromagnetic, and perhaps informational. That priority looks noble when it keeps debris from cascading. It looks indifferent when it mutes a neighborhood, so the work can happen. Stakes show up where ethics meet physics. A damping rule that shrinks Earth's signature outward keeps our shout from traveling farther than we understand. If dark forest logic applies, the lattice buys us quiet in a loud sky. But the same rule bleeds into everyday life, trading autonomy for risk management. People nudged away from doorways, clinics logging microsymptoms, instruments singing silence where sound should be. At the top, benefit. At the bottom, cost. A system can carry both truths without noticing either. Meanwhile, rumors of active interceptions refuse to settle. Pilots over contested seas describe objects flaring and dimming near unknown projectiles. Sailors swear arrays shifted seconds before telemetry went dark. Governments do not confirm. The pattern stays coy. Anchors park over corridors during drills. Damping increases when ordnance flies, then both dissolve. If there's a doctrine, it's function over narrative. Manage envelopes, reduce uncontrolled emissions, service nodes, repeat. Now remember, institutions have positioned themselves without saying why. FI 2025 pushed anomaly literacy and machine learning into daily workflow, pulled commercial feeds into fusion engines, and sent quiet teams to ridges above persistent corridors. The AARO's public line holds, no verified extraterrestrial technology. The split between policy and posture mirrors the split in the sky. Publicly, observation. Practically, coexistence with a system that dictates timing and geometry, whether anyone admits it or not. Human decisions bend around that gravity. Airports reroute arrivals during dwell. Utilities ride through transients that cluster inside array windows. Hospitals add local redundancy after odd telemetry drops. None of this proves malice. It proves adaptation. We are learning to live under someone else's scheduling layer. The eerie part is how frictionless it feels once you see it. Arrays don't bark orders. They enforce probabilities. Missiles fired into busy corridors are more likely to fail. Launch noise is more likely to hush. Home devices are more likely to stutter. People are more likely to step aside. The lattice doesn't need authority to govern. It needs repetition. So which is it, shield or cage? The answer hides in scale. At planetary altitude, the network behaves like a guardian that dislikes mess. At human altitude, it behaves like a custodian that dislikes witnesses. Protection and surveillance aren't opposites here. They're outputs of the same rule set. Shield at the top, coercion at the bottom, function over consent. If that's the function, what's the doctrine? We'll find it where launch calendars, hotspot maps, and field deployments overlap, and where silence, applied on purpose, leaves the clearest trace. Dark forest reconsidered. Why hide the noise? From orbit, the lattice looks like caution. On the ground, it feels like interference. To understand why damping would be doctrine, we have to widen the frame beyond launches and grids and ask a harder question. Who hears us now that we never stop talking? By 2025, Earth's shout isn't poetic. It's measurable. Starlink blankets latitudes with constant exchange. OneWeb, Iridium, and Kuiper stack more layers, each adding round-the-clock emissions. Not deliberate beacons, leakage. Side lobes, handshakes, retries, telemetry. Add radar, uplinks, downlinks, and the hum of a billion devices bouncing off ionized sky. We built a planet that radiates. Dark forest logic isn't a prophecy. It's a survival model. In a wilderness where you can't authenticate strangers, and the cost of assuming goodwill is extinction, silence becomes strategy. You don't announce beneath a canopy you haven't mapped. You shape your profile, and you mask what you can't mute. That's where damping lands, not as malice, but as risk management at scale. We test that against the clock. Arrays appear during the loudest moments, ignition windows, stage separations, debris cascades, weak field crossings, then apply selective hush. Not a blackout, a haircut. Narrow notches walking with geometry, RF reduced where it blooms hardest. If the lattice enforces quiet, you'd expect it to nudge in two directions at once. Lower outbound leakage and buffer local spikes that might propagate far. That's exactly what the notches and the microsymptoms look like. Outwardly smaller signatures, inwardly inconvenient moments. Skeptics push the range argument. Signals drop fast with distance. Our bleed won't wake anything a light year away. That math holds for analog assumptions. But density changes the game. Tens of thousands of nodes produce persistence. Not a shout, a lantern that never goes out. And you don't need to reach a neighbor to matter. You need to be detected by a listener with better ears and more time. If detection is cheap and motives are unknowable, the model says limit exposure. Meanwhile, something else is happening at the seams. During near-miss collisions, Type 1 anchors bracket altitude bands for the exact windows when debris multiplies. At the same time, ground stations log telemetry irregularities that resolve after dwell. Call it space weather if you like. The sun's quiet nights don't care. The pattern does. It reads like a network that dislikes uncontrolled cascades because cascades create noise no one can predict. Then there's routing. Damping isn't deletion. We see notches move while links ride around gaps. Traffic flows continue, just shaped. The hush looks like quality of service for a planet. Protect the channel by compressing peaks, absorb spill, and keep the aggregate profile within a target envelope. Locally, that means your baby monitor hisses and your router drops. Cosmically, it means our halo shrinks. If you're looking for doctrine, it hides in FI 2025's bland lines. Anomaly-literate workforce. Rapid ML adoption. Commercial data integration. Those aren't decorations. They're tools for enforcement at machine speed. Models catch geometry, correlate lag, predict loud windows, and preposition arrays before humans notice. The public never hears the rule because rules run faster than speech. The counter-argument is moral, not technical. Who chose this? Protection without consent still strips consent. A system may lower existential risk while taxing ordinary life with microwave nudges and brief telemetry drops. Shield at the top, coercion at the bottom, again. That split doesn't resolve under dark forest logic, it worsens. The quieter the planet wants to be outward, the more intrusive the work feels inward. There's another layer, misdirection. If the lattice values camouflage, it will make our anomalies look like ours. Language shifts to orbital anomalies and domain awareness. Arrays arrive before exercises, dwell over perimeters, and leave without comment. The posture reads as sovereign vigilance while the geometry belongs to something older. Camouflage isn't just spectral, it's political. What nobody knew a decade ago is how quickly silence becomes habit. Airports reschedule to avoid dwell. Utilities build ride-through for array windows. Hospitals add redundant telemetry paths. Citizens learn the feeling of a notch and call it bad Wi-Fi. Quiet normalizes. Once a rule sits in muscle memory, consent decays into routine. Still, the model doesn't absolve the mystery at the core, who enforces it. If this is ours, it's the most successful. Clandestine program in history, reframing civilian life beneath an unacknowledged safety layer. If it isn't, then we're tenants under building management that prefers our lights dimmer after midnight. Both readings end with the same lived truth. The lattice reacts to our noise. 3 details bring the doctrine down to human scale. 1, arrays arrive before we get loud, not after. 2, damping targets the bands that spill the farthest, then releases. 3, service happens inside the geometry. 4th points slipping into touch rooftop arrays, substations, and launch corridors. Maintenance under cover of quiet. That's not spectacle. That's policy you feel. So why hide the noise? Because risk isn't linear anymore. Our shout scales faster than our wisdom, and in a forest you cannot see. Humility can look like suppression from below. The lattice calls that a trade worth making. We don't get a vote, but we do get a map. Follow the repeatables and the rule writes itself. Don't advertise, manage peaks, fix the lines, and leave no speeches behind. Government proximity, collaboration, or coexistence. While arrays learned our calendars, something quieter learned our roads. In Utah, the tire arcs locals photographed above a persistent corridor matched a pattern that would reappear oceans away. Same wheelbase, same tread, same tripod footmarks at 27 inches on center. The teams worked before dawn, left no insignia, and unfolded portable arrays that looked like someone had built radar out of camping gear. Days later, Type 2 geometry held over the valley, and the neighborhood SDR nets caught a moving notch. Officially, nothing happened. Practically, coexistence left tracks. Whistleblowers tried to bridge the gap with stories that sounded half memoir, half NDA. One described schedule anomalies at a restricted site. Hangars cleared with no notice, badges that opened doors for people whose uniforms carried no branch. Another sketched a meeting room where the projector stayed off and the briefer spoke in verbs: detect, deconflict, damp, never nouns. None of it proves collaboration. All of it reads like an operating relationship built on rules instead of admissions. Language shifted in public where it could. AARO said the words they could keep under oath. No verifiable extraterrestrial technology. Orbital anomalies under review. Historical cases likely misidentifications. Meanwhile, FI 2025 did the opposite of denial. It mandated anomaly-literate personnel, pushed rapid ML adoption, and braided commercial streams into military pipelines. That's not disclosure, it's plumbing. You don't lay pipe like that for folklore. Action brought the posture into view. In Argentina, near that shaft with right angles, residents filmed convoys and pop-up dishes that bloomed from hard cases like metal flowers. The teams worked one night, packed before sunrise, and left the same tripod grids locals in Utah had measured with tape. 2 days later, a Type 1 anchor parked high. SDRs recorded a notch. A substation 2 kilometers away logged a transient and recovered. No press release. No, we were there. Just cadence. Turkey added a different silhouette. Convoys moving under blackout. Boxes that unfolded into phased arrays pointed at air, and a quiet perimeter that turned back hikers without incident. In Cappadocia's valleys, guides found new compression marks atop ridges where Type 2 triangles had loitered the week prior. When they asked who ran the gear, the answers came in polite shrugs. Cooperation, if it exists, is less handshake than choreography. Procurement language filled the spaces testimony couldn't. Budgets salted with advanced sensor fusion, non-cooperative object tracking, and low-signature communications read dull on paper and sharp in context. Contracts emphasized analytics at ingestion, autonomy at the edge, and resilience through commercial redundancy. Partners didn't just sell bandwidth, they sold eyes. Starlink arcs that accidentally captured geometry, 1 year fed fusion engines the next. The spiral from observation to integration tightened, without a single podium moment. Skeptics pushed where they should. Uniforms can be misread. Treads repeat across fleets. Pop-up arrays aren't proof of non-human anything. True, but the pattern of timing keeps returning. Gear appears days before arrays dwell. Damping shows up during that window. Utilities quietly add ride-through. Airports adjust schedules. Then the ridge goes empty until the next calendar. If you're looking for collaboration as a treaty, you won't find it. If you're looking for coexistence as procedure, the evidence stacks without asking permission. Middle ground is the only ground that holds. Agencies deny what they cannot certify and prepare for what they cannot stop. In practice, that looks like deconfliction. Don't point a radar at a node. Don't schedule a launch without buffer. Don't light up a corridor when geometry says wait. In Utah, a pilot logged a NOTAM heed. Never seen before, temporary airspace management for non-cooperative object awareness. The phrase came and went in a month. The arrays didn't. Meanwhile, FOIA trickles revealed memos nobody wanted to write. Unexpected telemetry behavior coincident with local electromagnetic disturbance. Temporary loss of link margin during observational activity. Each sentence was careful as a bomb tech. None said spheres. All said timing. Then came the night the split screen went literal. In the Pacific, a rectangular box on a destroyer's aft deck unfolded into a dish that tracked a fixed point at high altitude for nearly an hour. At the same time, 3 points formed a Type 2 triangle above the task group. A sailor filmed both, the dish and the lights, and posted before the bridge could ask him nicely to stop. The clip showed no drama. It showed coexistence. Our sensor pointed up, their geometry held. The sea forgot both by morning. Across a decade, this is how collaboration looks when nobody signs it. Vehicles without markings that leave repeatable signatures. Policy that never says the forbidden words, but builds systems to live with them. Quiet agreements written in NOTAMs, launch buffers, and the silence of dawn tripods taken down before coffee brews. If you need a single sentence to carry the weight, disclosure hasn't arrived, but adaptation has. We stand next to a lattice we didn't design, log its timing, shape our operations around its rules, and call the arrangement everything but what it is. Collaboration implies dialogue. What we have is coexistence with choreography. Steps we've learned because stepping wrong made instruments sing. The 2025 surge, launches, collisions, and returns. By spring, the cadence stopped feeling like progress and started sounding like a drum. Launch calendars filled until the white space vanished. Florida, Texas, Kazakhstan, Vandenberg, Mahia, days when ignition was the weather. Starlink stacks went up like habit. Kuiper joined with production birds. China's thousand sails threw fresh metal into low orbit. If you wanted a picture of humanity getting louder, you could measure it in payload fairings and ground crews, who stopped counting sleep by nights and started counting in windows. While our count rose, the lattice kept its own. Before a big batch deployed, Type 1 anchors appeared high over the relevant bands and held through ascent. The timing was precise enough to embarrass coincidence. Dwell began in the hour when crews fueled, spiked near max Q, pulsed at stage separation, softened as burns ended, then returned during orbit, raising like a supervisor who checks the stairwell before the fire drill and after. On 3 nights in May, ground RF stations caught sub-second notches in the same 2 bands at ignition plus 90 seconds. This time in Florida, then Texas, then Kazakhstan. The thumb pressed, slid, and lifted. The geometry moved on. Starship rewrote the scale, and the lattice answered with proportion. During heavy test flights, arcs of Type 2 nodes bracketed the corridor above the Gulf with a width that matched ascent profile, not wind. From the barrier islands, beach cameras picked up 3 points hanging where the cloud deck thinned, dim enough to hide unless you knew the angles to look along. A retired controller watched from his porch and said it out loud to an empty room. "They're here before we are." Collisions put a harder edge on the ritual. When a dead satellite shed a cloud of fragments over Central Asia, the first reports sounded like normal, operators filing space, weather, and expected anomalies. But astronomers with long lenses filmed a Type 1 triangle holding right above the shell, and 2 amateur ground stations logging L-band data recorded erratic packet loss that stopped when the anchor slid off. Hours later, the same formation reappeared at a slightly higher altitude, as if the shell had spread and the bracket widened to match. The sun was quiet. The map wasn't. Near misses followed the choreography without the headlines. Conjunction alerts spiked, then damped. Arrays arrived early, then left late. In one case, a small sat performed an unplanned avoidance burn, and the triangle paused for exactly 3 minutes. The length of the burn plus the time it takes for telemetry to settle when your heart calms after a sprint. That detail never made a press release. It made a technician rub their eyes in a fluorescent room and write "resolved" in a line they didn't expect to write twice that week. Elsewhere, returns came back like muscle memory. In the Pacific, arcs of Type 2 nodes shadowed missile defense drills again, this time holding 2 nights before and 1 night after. Sailors filmed orbs above deck heights, then deleted videos when senior chiefs explained operational security in the tone adults use for children near stoves. In Eastern Europe, arrays flared over contested air corridors the afternoon before a scheduled exercise, and civilian GPS accuracy hiccuped. Across a swath where ADS-B gaps walked like careful feet, the split screen held. Our posture said readiness. Their geometry drew circles around our routes. Ground effects threaded through the surge like stitching. In 2 towns under launch corridors, neighborhood SDR nets caught moving notches every night a window opened. Routers dropped in synchronized stutters. Doorbell cameras saved files with timestamps off by seconds, then corrected on their own. A utility near a major range logged 2 transient trips during ascent profiles and wrote, "No equipment fault found." The superintendent added a note in pen. "Happens when the big ones go." Skeptics kept the ledger honest. Flares happen. Firmware rolls. Urban interference makes ghosts. But the 2025 surge collapsed excuses by turning them into a schedule. Notches walked when arrays dwelled. Anchors parked when shells spread. Triangles returned when drills rehearsed. The system didn't need to convince anyone. It enforced timing until the argument felt childish. There were quieter tells too. A series of NOTAMs began appearing in language nobody recognized. Temporary airspace advisories for non-cooperative object awareness that cleared the skies above corridors for half hours that matched array dwell. They disappeared after a month, as if someone realized the words revealed more than the policy wanted to. The arrays stayed. Airports adjusted arrivals without publishing why. Controllers learned to hold vectors when the sky felt soft. Then came the night that turned mutter into sentence. A Starship ascent hit max Q. The crowd on the beach cheered, and phones along 5 miles of sand lost signal for the same 2 seconds. Video timelines blinked, then resumed with 3 points still fixed against a thinner sky. Later, operators filed their usual reports. Nominal. Within parameters. Nominal now includes a lattice that arrives, quiets, and leaves without leaving a name. By year's end, launches blurred into workdays, collisions into maintenance, and returns into ritual. The surge didn't announce activation. It revealed it by making absence the anomaly. On nights without anchors, controllers felt exposed, like stepping onto a highway without lane lines. We trained to the new normal and stopped saying the words out loud. The network didn't raise its voice. It didn't have to. Geometry kept the beat. Timing wrote the rule. And we moved inside it. The Type 4 hypothesis, subterranean command. If geometry rules the sky, what rules the geometry? The answer may sit below our feet. Jackson's Type 4 frames the underground not as myth, but as control, nodes that push up signals and pull down tasks, keeping tiers synchronized while arrays service and damp. Utah, Cappadocia, Argentina, 3 regions, same strange traces. Corridors cut too straight for lava tubes, bands of stone fused as if heat had licked walls and ribbons, and metallic flecks lodged like filings drawn by a magnet. None of that proves a system, but the echoes are hard to ignore when timing upstairs matches activity below. Action gave the hypothesis its legs. In Utah, dawn tripods rose on ridges as a shaft corridor flickered with microwave bursts. That night, Type 2 held and a walking RF notch crossed town. In Cappadocia, convoys set pop-up arrays above valleys with right-angle cuts. A day later, Type 1 anchored and a substation logged a transient. In Argentina, a 4th point slipped inside a triangle, paused over a shaft head, and returned, minutes after the notch lifted. Stakes are blunt. Command below, grid above. If Type 4s exist, we're living inside an architecture that treats human terrain as service access. Which begs the only question that matters. Where's the switch, and who owns it? The disclosure and the new path, what the activation means. The smoking pattern isn't a single event. It's a rhythm, synchronized damping, layered formations, ground arrays that pre-stage the sky, and clocks that line up across continents. Call it activation if you need one word. What it really means is that the rules are engaged and not stepping back. The lattice isn't just visible now. It's operating with constraints we can measure. Adaptive shielding at scale, local coercion where work needs quiet, and service slipping between nodes like maintenance done in a language we can't read. Why now? The answer is as unromantic as a launch calendar. We got louder. Tens of thousands of satellites shout into a sky that used to tolerate static. Debris risks multiplied as we stacked metal in low bands. Near-miss envelopes turned daily. And the defense establishment, quietly, methodically, trained an anomaly-literate workforce, stood up fusion engines that can hear patterns humans miss, and pulled commercial feeds into pipes built to act in real time. The moment our footprint scaled beyond our judgment, the lattice tightened its practice. Not a reveal. A response. The choice that leaves us with isn't comfortable. We can cooperate with a system that didn't ask permission, we can push for countermeasures that blunt its reach, or we can continue the posture we've adopted by accident, calibrated ignorance, working around rules we pretend don't exist. Cooperation would look like formal deconfliction, publishing buffers, timing launches to array windows, adding ride-through to critical systems, and admitting in policy what we already admit in scheduling. Countermeasures would mean trying to punch holes in damping, beamforming that resists notches, hardened telemetry paths, local shielding, and accepting the risk that pushing back against a rule set bigger than ours invites sharper corrections. Ignorance is what we have now. Unofficial agreements written in NOTAMs and dawn tripod footprints, everyone pretending the geometry is weather. Before you pick a path, look at the repeatables we've earned the hard way. Equilateral spacing across tiers, lag that scales with altitude like a metronome measured in milliseconds, RF notches that walk the ground in lockstep with geometry, utilities logging transients inside dwell windows, satellite upsets clustering under high anchors, human microsymptoms that recur with small, instrumented spikes. None of these items wins an argument alone. Together, they draw a boundary. Inside it, the lattice makes decisions. Outside it, our stories don't matter. Disclosure, in that light, stops looking like a press conference and starts looking like a cultural shift. Officials don't have to say spheres for the doctrine to become real. They only have to normalize anomaly literacy, publish open standards for citizen data, and acknowledge in practice what the maps already taught us. We live under an operational layer we didn't authorize. The next version of FI policy can keep its careful nouns if it adds one verb, coordinate. Not because coordination flatters conspiracy, but because misalignment breaks things we rely on. On the ground, a new protocol isn't science fiction. It's simple behavior. Hospitals under mapped corridors add redundant telemetry paths and timestamp everything. Airports treat dwell like weather and schedule around it, openly. Utilities build ride-through on nights when array windows open and log transients without relegating them to undetermined. Citizens who film the sky include metadata, chain of custody, and synchronized clocks. They learn the difference between a flare and a formation. They overlay RF captures with visible returns. Evidence over excitement, because a record that can't be audited becomes fuel for denial. Ethics enters here, not as a slogan but as a ledger. Every planetary scale benefit has a local cost. Damping shrinks our outbound signature and buffers cascades. It also makes a NC timeout and a heart skip in a kitchen where a Type 3 passes too low. If we proceed with cooperation, the protocol must include human safeguards, standoff distances above hospitals and schools, published array windows over dense neighborhoods, medical monitoring in hotspots with data accessible to the people who live there. If coexistence is the reality, consent doesn't have to vanish entirely. It can be reconstructed in small, practical disclosures that admit the work and account for the bodies beneath it. The question that trails all this is the oldest one: who's we? If the lattice is ours, disclosure is an institutional problem, classification set against public safety and trust. If it isn't, disclosure is a diplomatic problem without an embassy, cohabitation under a landlord who doesn't answer the door. The pattern doesn't hand us an answer. It hands us a responsibility: behave as if cohabitation is real. Build procedures that reduce friction regardless of origin. Chuckle less at language like orbital anomalies, and translate it into checklists that keep nurses from chasing phantom dropouts and controllers from vectoring through dwell. There's a smaller change that matters more than any policy. Start treating timing as the text. Stop waiting for speeches. Systems confess in schedules. If arrays arrive before we ignite, if notches walk when triangles hold, if tripods bloom before dawn and substation logs spike that night, then the message doesn't need a podium. It needs a calendar. Put launch windows, hotspot maps, and public health overlays on the same page. Let the data speak to each other until the story writes itself without adjectives. One last truth, the quiet kind that seldom makes headlines: the network didn't descend. It revealed its rules when we got noisy enough to trigger them. That means the path forward isn't a hunt, it's an adjustment. Learn the rules. Publish the overlaps. Protect the vulnerable under corridors we didn't choose. And hold institutions to the same standard the lattice holds us to: repeatability over rhetoric. We don't get to pick whether activation happened. We get to pick how we live under it. Cooperation gives us guardrails. Countermeasures buy us moments and maybe consequences. Ignorance turns us into extras in our own sky. The maps won't make that choice for us. They will keep lighting the same places until we understand that disclosure isn't a sentence at the end of a hearing. It's a practice that starts with telling the truth about the clocks we can all see. The smoking pattern, consolidated evidence beat. Here's where all the threads tighten into one rope. Forget single clips and late-night stories. Look only at what repeats. Equilateral spacing appears across tiers. Type 3 near roofs and roads, Type 2 riding corridors, Type 1 anchoring high, and the angles hold within narrow tolerances while edge lengths breathe with the target below. Lag scales with altitude like a metronome you can set your watch to. Milliseconds between tiers, consistent city to city, month to month. When geometry returns with this kind of discipline, it stops being a sighting. It becomes a system signature. Next, the RF tells the same story on a different channel. Grid SDR networks under map corridors keep catching moving notches. 2.4 GHz here, 900 MHz there, walking block to block in lockstep with visible Type 2 triangles. The notch appears, routers drop, baby monitors hiss, ADSB returns blink, and then everything snaps back when the geometry lifts. The artifact isn't a blackout, it's selective hush that preserves function while shaving peaks. We've seen it over launch windows, during ascent profiles, across weak field zones, and even above quiet towns that only get loud on drill nights. When the thumbprint keeps turning up in the same places at the same times, you're not chasing ghosts. You're mapping policy. Utilities put hard numbers on soft skies. Transient trips cluster inside array dwell windows, then write no equipment fault found, as if embarrassment could erase a timestamp. Substations reset and rate the event undetermined, while neighborhood SDRs show the notch passing the fence line and the fourth node slipping into the triangle to pause over a transformer yard. Later, the same yard adds ride through and stops filing reports, but not because the pattern ended, because practice became normal. Satellites give you the macro. Upset rates spike in the South Atlantic anomaly, then collapse when anchors move. Operators write space weather on quiet sun nights because the form demands a cause, but the clock points elsewhere. Persistent Type 1 dwell clustered. Bit flips, attitude holds resolving exactly as geometry slides away. After fragmentations, high anchors hold over debris shells, widen as the shell spreads, then thin when conjunction alerts ease. It looks like supervision, not spectacle, and it lands inside the same minutes across oceans. Human bodies register the smallest echoes. Clinics under persistent corridors report microclusters of dizziness and nausea that last minutes, not hours. We pair symptoms with instruments, and the instruments find what stories can't prove alone. 2 gamma microspikes, 3 microwave transients, all within seconds of visible Type 3 passes and walking notches. The doses are small, localized, and gone fast. Nobody codes a red alert, and yet people step out of rooms without knowing why. Meanwhile, a highway patrol GPS drops lock under a low triangle, reconnects with a straight line no road could draw, and a farm 2 miles away writes time correction into a camera log. Disparate artifacts, one rhythm. Institutional behavior fills the margins. FI 2025 mandates anomaly literacy, rapid ML adoption, and commercial data integration like it's debugging debris models, but the cadence on the ground says otherwise. Dawn tripods unfold above valleys that arrays will cover that night. NOTAMs briefly introduce non-cooperative object awareness, then vanish while controllers keep scheduling around dwell. Airports treat silence like weather. Hospitals add redundant telemetry in mapped paths. Utilities build ride-through on nights with open windows. Nobody uses the forbidden nouns, but calendars don't care about vocabulary. Now look at timing across domains. Launch windows, sub-second dips at ignition plus 90 seconds and near stage separation, night after night, range after range, with Type 2 triangles pacing ascent corridors. Collision envelopes. Type 1 anchors bracket altitude bands for the precise windows debris risks peak, while ground stations log packet loss that resolves on cue. Weak fields. Upset clusters amplify during persistent dwell, then retreat when anchors move. Drills and exercises, arrays pre-stage, damping increases, ADSB gaps walk in clean edges, then dissolve. Different actors, same metronome. Add the 4th node behavior. Inside triangles, service points slip to rooftops, substation fences, and pad perimeters, linger for seconds, then return to corners without breaking the angles. Inverters log brief anomalies. SCADA alarms batch and deliver late. Cameras miss frames. The geometry never loses discipline. If this is surveillance, it's instrumented. If it's protection, it's maintained. Either way, it works like a network with service windows you can set a watch by. Skeptics keep us honest, so we rear on the controls. Rural sectors without hotspots, same instruments, same schedules, no walking notches, no tier lag, no clustered symptoms. Then a nearby exercise reroutes. Arrays appear. The notch walks. The negative turns positive without changing anything except human activity. Correlation loses its excuses when it follows us onto new ground. What about hoaxes and one-offs? We throw them out by rule. No metadata, no chain of custody, no redundant sensors, gone. What survives are the repeatables anyone with a clock and patience can find. Equilateral spacing across tiers with altitude-scaled lag, RF notches that walk with arrays, utility transients clustered inside dwell windows, satellite anomalies under high anchors, human microsymptoms paired with instrument spikes, and institutional calendars bending around all of it without speeches. Each line is weak alone. Together, they stop asking for belief. If you need one sentence that earns the word smoking, timing repeats across geometry, spectrum, infrastructure, orbit, and bodies, and institutions now behave as if that timing governs them. Activation isn't a reveal, it's a schedule we live inside. The lattice doesn't argue. It arrives early, applies gain control, services nodes, and leaves. Every time it does, our systems, technical and human, adjust to meet it. That's the pattern. That's the beat. And that's the proof that matters. The new protocol, living under activation. If timing is the text, protocol is how we read it out loud. Living under activation doesn't start with belief. It starts with calendars, maps, and habits that keep people safe without waiting for permission. First, build comms resilience where dwell repeats. Treat array windows like weather. Airports already do it quietly. Now make it explicit. Publish local quiet hours, when geometry usually holds over approach paths and shift arrivals the way you shift for crosswinds. Hospitals under mapped corridors add redundant telemetry paths, hardwired second feeds, battery buffers on critical floors, and automatic timestamping that writes through minor RF notches without dropping patient data. Utilities ride through transients with staged capacitor switching and time-aligned alarms, so a damped burst doesn't. Batch alerts and dump them on a sleepy night crew. For homes near hotspots, think small and systematic. A basic SDR on a windowsill and a cheap GPS-disciplined clock can teach a neighborhood its own sky. When the notch walks, logs show it. Routers ride better if you diversify bands, split critical devices across 2.4 and 5 GHz, so a narrow hush doesn't take the room with it. Keep hardline backups for anything that matters during minutes, not hours. A landline that doesn't depend on the same bands. A wired monitor in a nursery that keeps working when the baby cam hisses. It's not paranoia, it's headroom. Data is the backbone. Citizen footage without metadata feeds denial. So we set community standards. Every clip gets GPS coordinates, UTC timestamps burned in from a synced source, and the original file preserved alongside any edit. Pair video with instrument snapshots, a spectrum grab from a local SDR, a magnetometer blip, a dosimeter tick if you've got it. Chain of custody matters. Hash the files, log who touched them, and share originals with at least 2 independent repositories. When 3 blocks report the same geometry with the same clock, arguments shrink down to what they should be. Interpretation, not existence. Medical monitoring near mapped paths needs calm rigor. Clinics log symptom clusters by time and location, not just diagnosis. When dizziness or headache spike for 20 minutes across a neighborhood, that's an instrument, too. Especially if a dosimeter and an RF diode in 2 living rooms recorded clean spikes at the same minute. No dramatics, no sirens. Just layered records that let researchers distinguish coincidence from pattern and give public health officials the leverage to ask for standoff distances above sensitive facilities. Ethics isn't a press release, it's a checklist. If coexistence is the reality, then guardrails become consent in practice. Publish anticipated array windows over dense neighborhoods. Negotiate standoff altitudes above hospitals and schools. Add real-time quiet advisories to the same apps that push storm alerts, 30-minute notices that let a neonatal unit switch to hardened telemetry, or a utility crew delay a high-risk operation until the notch passes. If the lattice won't brief us, we brief ourselves. Investigators keep the line between evidence and belief with process, not personality. Separate what's logged, what's contested, and what's omitted, and defend those categories even when they hurt your favorite story. Standardize submission templates, device model, firmware, antenna, calibration date, clock source, and observer notes. Require at least 2 independent sensors for any strong claim. Bake in negative controls, quiet regions with the same kits and schedules, so you can show what nothing looks like in your own data. The fastest way to lose the narrative is to win an argument with a clip that can't be audited. Operations need deconfliction that doesn't flinch. Launch providers plan buffers that acknowledge dwell, quietly today, openly tomorrow. Range safety builds damping into risk models the way it builds winds and icing. Military exercises publish timing blocks to airmen and mariners that reflect non-cooperative object awareness, not because the phrase is elegant, but because it keeps crews from lighting up corridors when the lattice already holds them. Not everything can be public. Enough can be that the people under the paths stop guessing. For municipalities, add an activation layer to planning the way you added floodplains. Public Works knows the corridors, quietly at first, then on a map. Schedule critical maintenance away from repeatable windows. Site new substations and hospitals with array history, weighted alongside traffic and cost. It won't stop a notch, but it will keep your worst minutes from landing on your worst days. Education isn't belief training, it's literacy. Teach anomaly discipline in the same breath as first aid. How to collect, how to timestamp, how to avoid contaminating a scene. Put a citizen capture kit on library shelves. Loaner SDRs, GPS-locked clocks, tripods, with a 1-page guide on metadata and chain of custody. The point isn't virality. It's verifiability. For technologists, harden at the edges. Design routers and IoT devices to degrade gracefully across narrow notches without cascading failures. Add buffer strategies to SCADA systems that preserve ordering even when telemetry stutters, with logs that write honest timing instead of smoothing spikes into fiction. Build ADSB ingest that flags clean-edged gaps as artifacts to annotate, not trash. And push for open standards that let citizen instruments talk to public archives without a PhD. Finally, build the map we've been pretending not to see. It's a living overlay, launch calendars, predicted dwell windows, historical geometry, hospital telemetry flags, utility ride-through notes, and citizen captures with honest metadata, privacy scrubbed and public by default. Let people see the sky's schedule the way they see rain moving across a radar. If you're going to live under timing, you might as well own it. None of this requires answers to the oldest questions. It only requires admitting the clocks that already govern us. When the notch walks, someone in a NICU gets a nudge to switch to the hardened line. When Type 1 anchors park over weak fields, a range control room shifts a window. When a fourth node slips inside a triangle, a substation crew pauses a risky task and resumes 5 minutes later. Protocol won't solve the mystery. It will keep people from becoming its collateral. And that's the pivot. We stop waiting for a podium and start treating activation like weather with rules. The lattice will keep its silence. We answer with schedules, standards, and small mercies that add up to consent rebuilt in practice. Evidence over excitement. Guardrails over speeches. Clocks over myths. It didn't descend. It revealed its rules the moment our noise outgrew our judgment. If you want more than headlines, help build the record. Timestamp your footage, pair it with instruments, and map what's repeatable. Subscribe and watch the next investigation, where we publish the living activation map. Add your verifiable captures, and let the clocks write the story with us.